welcome to Build a Great Club series, and this part is of the series. We're going to talk agronomy. We're going to talk about growing grass, keeping the golf course green, the bathrooms clean, and all the stuff in between. So, a lot of the things that we will talk about really is really every single place is a lot different. Every golf course is a lot different, but there's standards and there's practices that we try to implement through all of our properties. And this is Jeff Carlstrand. He's our director of agronomy. He works with all of the superintendents that we have out there into the field, and he really is the last thing and last guard of defense on agronomy. He gives our superintendents that are out there just great feedback and best practices, and then also just maybe another voice to listen to as far as what's happening with one of the biggest assets at a club, and usually that's the golf course itself. So typically when we onboard a property, Jeff is one of the first ones that are there. You usually are driving around and they're saying, "Who's Kenny Rogers?" That's out there, and he's out there, and he's doing what? What do you do when you drive out there and you're driving around the golf course? Hopefully you're driving around with the superintendent, but sometimes you're there by yourself, aren't you?
Yes, I try to come in as early as I can and tour the course, and sometimes there's a superintendent on property and sometimes there isn't. And I would prefer, if there is a superintendent, to drive around with them. They know the property, and so they can give me some insight, and hopefully we can go back and forth and get some ideas from each other about how to go. The golf courses in general are the largest budget overall, so there's a tendency to make some major cuts in that area, and part of my job is to protect the golf course and protect the overall, because that's what most of the people are there at the club for. And so I'll ride around the course and come up with a list of things. I like to inspect the equipment, see the age of the infrastructure, how old the pump stations are, how old the equipment is, if there's any major problems, when there's been some things done in the past as far as reconstruction to tees or greens or bunkers or anything like that. And then we go back and we formulate a plan.
So let me ask. So it's week one on where we're there, and usually the superintendent is looking at you like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's going to take my job," and that is never the case really. To right down the road. I mean,
we never do that.
I mean, I think the thing that you're there to support, you're there to help, and then to a certain degree, you're there for another voice, for maybe some of the challenges that the golf course has experienced. I mean, we have onboarded properties where the greens really have not been there. I remember one property that you onboarded where the greens, the majority of the greens were gone, and then you worked really diligently there with the existing staff that was there to bring that property back to life. So to a certain degree, when you're there more as support for the teams that are there, and to help them get the most out of the agronomy practices that are there.
That's true. We do not try and relieve staff. That's not our intention at all. Those people have the background, and I can't come in on day one and make some big changes in there. So that's never our goal going into a property. We do want to formulate a new plan based on any of the new realities that the property is experiencing, whether it's financial or the agronomic issues that are going on, because we still we are a drain of revenue, but we are vital to the production of revenue overall. So there has to be a back and forth between what the golf maintenance department needs and the property as a whole, and base that on any new revenue projections. And it will take a few days for us to look at that, and then I'll get with Sean and the rest of our team and the finance director and some other people involved in it, some of the other operations people, and we'll come together with a plan. And I think the most important thing then is we share that plan not only with either the boards or the owners, depending on the type of facility it is, but also the staff and members, and particularly the golf maintenance staff, because they're going to be affected, can be affected quite a bit by it, and we want to minimize any of that angst going forward. Um, and part of the new plan that we try and do is we set realistic expectations. So in the past, the club may have had an idea of what they wanted on their property, and maybe they can't afford that level of maintenance that they would like. And so there has to be some realistic changes, and the uh, everyone involved has to agree to those changes. So we get buy-in from our group, and then we get buy-in from the board of directors or the owners, and then really we have to get buy-in from the staff at all levels, the operations staff, the golf maintenance staff, because it affects them, and if they're not going to do their job, it's going to continue. The club will continue to struggle.
So, ironically, we have budgets that are you would say that they're small golf maintenance budgets. But then on the flip side, we have properties that where the golf maintenance budgets they're rather large. In excess of $1 million that are there by the time you roll everything in there. So it's all across the gamut, and you're touching on one point that is absolutely critical, is setting the expectations of knowing, what can what can the property sustain. There's properties that are out there. We know we manage several of them where they're managed by a large HOA, and they have the dues of the HOA that are coming in, and so to a certain degree the agronomy practices that are there is and it can allow itself to have a very large maintenance budget that's there, and consequently the product that is put out every day is flawless. There is a direct correlation to dollars spent and then the product that you put out on the golf course, where there's other properties that we have where the maintenance budget is significantly less. And so when you talk about those other properties where maybe the maintenance budget's significantly less, you have to identify those priorities. And you always talk about center line. And those priorities being center line, and then working. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about kind of how you go about prioritizing the existing resources that you have that you can work with, and working with the superintendent at that particular property to make sure that the priorities are in the line that you want them to be in.
Sure. By center line, no, this isn't news to any superintendent, but you're talking about focusing on the greens, the tees, and the fairways, and making sure that where the golfer is doing most of the play, those are the areas that you focus on. So you want greens in good shape, you want fairways to have grass on them, you want tees in good shape also, and then bunkers, and then it moves out from there. To roughs, and then wooded areas and more naturalized areas, and so some of those areas can you can maintain a lesser level of upkeep on them, perhaps, and they'll do fine. There can be a big issue on a lot of the newer courses built in the last 25 years or so, where you have homes built on both sides of every fairway, and that makes it tougher to make, if you're looking for naturalized areas, it may make it tougher to do those just because the homeowners will be calling all the time. So that may not be a option in areas like that. But overall, a lot of areas can still be pushed a little bit, and they'll still function fine.
Mm-hmm. Ironically, we had in that situation, we do have some of the properties where they want their yard to be identical to the rough that the house is on, and that's always that's always kind of a challenge for the superintendent that's there. It's fighting that. Okay, that homeowner has a 40-foot frontage, but the superintendent has
Yeah, that could
6 miles worth
right.
of grass that he's mowing.
That could be 60 yards or 80 yards away from the center line of the fairway, and it's so from our standpoint, it's of lesser importance, but we realize that the homeowner, that's the most important. They don't even care about the person 3 doors down.
Right.
It's in front of their house, and so that's always important. We try and keep that in mind.
So naturalized areas, we've walked in on some clubs where, like you said, they're mowing everything, anything, and everything. I remember one of the properties I worked at at a former lifetime ago, and we mowed everything. We mowed everything. Soon as you walked into the gates, everything was mowed, all the way right up to underneath the trees, and we had zero naturalized areas. But there's always opportunities that are out there for that.
Yes, that's been a trend for the last several decades. Is to have perfectly manicured from property line to property line, but with the addition of the Audubon Society over the last 2 decades, and the expectations of the general public as far as environmental concerns and stuff like that, it's a little bit easier to incorporate some naturalized areas, even if it is just some mulching up in the tree lines or something like that, making big beds so you're not mowing in areas all the time. That even a little bit like that can help. But there is you don't want a lot of little beds all over the place, so they have to be at least probably a quarter to a half acre in size to make it worthwhile doing. Otherwise, the labor savings just aren't there.
Right.
And I think at one of the clubs I was at, we came up with about 5 acres that doesn't have to be mowed every week, and that's a big savings. It's a savings in fuel and time, and it allows that property didn't have the staff available, so it frees up a lot of time to let that employee that might be on a rough mower focus on some other areas.
Mm-hmm. So talking about staffing and generally golf maintenance, there's like you said earlier, you said it was a drain. I think that it's a beautification aspect of the property. Nothing prettier than walking in on the property and seeing the golf course just in impeccable shape. And so how important, and you have some of your crews that have been around for a while. I mean, they have been with you and with us for a long time, and being able to maintain them season after season after season.
Oh, I think that's critical. I think the staff, one of our properties has 2 employees that have 20 plus years on the property, so I can go to them and you get a history and you find out what's been done in the past, even if they were even if they're a beginning employee, they've still been around the whole time, so they know what's going on. And I think you learn an awful lot. I learn something every time I get involved with some of those people that have been around for a while. Just knowing the history, and you go back to them time and again and find out what's going on, and that helps if you have to make changes to the budget. And when we talk about changing the budget, I like to personally, if I'm in charge of that property, I want to have the first crack at changing the budget. I don't want someone else doing it for me, because I think I've got a better handle on my side. That's my area of expertise, so I've got a better handle on what's going on there. And I want to do that, and I will do that if we go into another property. I want that superintendent to also have that first crack at it to see what they can come up with, because the major benefit of that is you're going to get buy-in from that. If Sean just hands me a number and says, "Here, do it," that's Sean's plan, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, but there's no buy-in on my side. And so I want to do that same courtesy to other superintendents and other staff members out there. Let them go through their budget. They've gone through it a little bit. Let them make decisions, and you can give them targets, but they need to have the first crack at it.
It's funny you talk about that, because in our finance and accounting session that we had with Aaron Chandler, who's our one of the finance managers here at Up to Par, we talked about not only the budget but also the P&L, and how the P&L in the end is just it's a roadmap of all the management decisions that a club continually makes over the course of that 30-day window or snapshot. And so when you look at when you look into the agronomy and golf maintenance world, there's how many labor dollars, how many labor hours were here, how much did you spend in chemicals and fertilizer, how much did you spend in top dressing, what was the equipment lease, how much gas went out the door. I mean, there's a variety of different, how much mechanical repairs that are desperately needed. And so that leads us into one of the big areas is equipment. Equipment plays such a major role in effectively operating the golf maintenance area. It's number 2 on the Gallup engagement questions that Jeff Carlstrand, who runs all of our associate engagement for all of our 300 plus
for all 60 of our staff members.
Yeah, for all 300 plus of all of our associates that throughout the entire organization, throughout Up to Par. It's, do you have the right materials and equipment for you to be successful in your role? And we actually, as a company, we've embraced the Gallup 12 questions for our associate engagement. That's part of the best places to work aspect of our company. So we've walked into properties, and you and I can remember, we looked at each other and scratched our head. We walked into a property a few years back, and it was like 12 walking greens mowers, and they didn't have 12 guys to do the greens mowing at that given time. So the part of it is evaluating all of the equipment and what's the best equipment to use for that particular property.
Right. So as you formulate the new plan with any new financial restraints, then you really have to look at the equipment, because if you have way too much, and this property, we ended up disposing of some of the, returning some of it to a vendor, or trading some stuff in on stuff that would be more valuable to us, because there's some expense. All the golf maintenance equipment is expensive, and so you need to get the most bang for the buck out of it. But we will go in, and you certainly can't make changes all the time right away. But there may be some issues that give you better efficiency. I know we have changed at one of the courses. We have changed from specialty mowers to tractors with pull behind rotary units, and that allows that property to have a tractor available because they didn't have a tractor otherwise. So it's the ability to get the most that we can out of it, rather than having a standalone rough mower that is only good for that issue. So we look very closely at all that. We look, there's some times also where you do need some redundancy. You have to have a backup. Same property, we didn't have backup fairway mowers, so we were able to get a backup fairway mower just because the downtime was critical, and that's not something that we can afford the golfers to go through. So we evaluate all the equipment, make sure everything is working fine, and then a lot of times the equipment hasn't been maintained as well as it could, and that is very short-sighted on the property, from the property standpoint. So we work very hard to do the best we can within our means to make sure all the equipment, it may be older, but if it's running, then you can extend the life for a few years. That's what we try and do, and then we'll come up with a capital plan for all the equipment And we may stretch some of the times. If they have a useful life of 7 years, we may try and get, if they're properly maintained, maybe we get 9 years or 10 years out of them. That could really help that club in the long run.
So there's also times where we've walked in we've been there at properties, and maybe if I can take a step back, and I may have said this earlier, there's very few times in which someone is picking up the phone and saying, "We're making a ton of money. The golf course is in fantastic shape. And you know what? The burgers that are coming out of the kitchen, as well as the fillets, are just spot on. And then, gosh almighty, we have the best people. That just
We
doesn't.
need you.
We need you to run our place." And so, and in the end, one of the things that we do, we fix clubs, and this is how we go about doing it. And some of the times, we walk into a property where the golf course, the maintenance of the golf course is maybe the driving factor why we are there. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's the burgers coming out of the kitchen. Sometimes the existing staff can't play real nice in the sandbox. But the times in which it is the golf course, one of the things that we have noticed is that they've maybe pushed off some things in the past. Whether, like for example, I know at one of the properties it's going to be our 4th year in a row where we're going into the spring season where we're going to heavily verticut the fairways to reduce the thatch that's in the fairways. And that's just sound agronomy practice for bent grass fairways that has a lot of thatch that's in there to reduce that. So maybe if you can walk us through some of the things that you've noticed or you try not to avoid maybe those long-term implications where necessarily generates a phone call to us. So twofold. Keep making those same mistakes and give us a call. Or, these are some of the things that you can look at your own place to make sure that you're doing those things to avoid giving us a call. So
I remember that site visit. The first time we were on there, we got to the 3rd hole, I think, and I told Sean, I said, "Man, these things are it's like walking on a sponge out here." And the rooster tails were coming off the back of the tires, and it hadn't rained for quite a while. So we did, at that property, we did institute very aggressive aerification and verticutting programs. And it has, we're on year 3 of it up there, and it has made a world of difference. Last summer, it was a lot drier than it was. And part of the other thing we did there too is we added drainage, and so we probably added 2 miles of drainage on that property. And the turf has really responded to that. And overall, the turf is very resilient, and you may be it can push, because obviously it got pushed pretty close to the breaking point. And so there may be some options sometime that you have to push the turf. So. And so that's the other reason I like to talk to the superintendent, because if that person has been there, unless that superintendent is brand new to the property also, they can tell you what's been done in the past, and maybe they haven't done some agronomic practices because they couldn't financially, or because of play, or the membership wouldn't allow them to. So some of that's an education issue for those people, but then it's just good sound practice to do as much as you can. We have looked at pushing aerification dates. There are some properties where financially we just have only been able to aerify once a year, but we try and typically we try and do that twice a year. But we'll do that, and then we will do some solid tining in between, which helps, and we'll do some continued top dressing in between. And so we feel that after being on the property several years, we feel that they'll be able to make it through the Mid-Atlantic summers. And I've been on that property a lot. I feel very confident that I'll make it through the summer. It's not something I want to do forever, but we can do it in a short term, for a couple of years, and I think the turf will be fine. And we've talked to the Greens Committee about it at that property, well in advance over the winter about the plans for the coming season, and they're on board with it. And so that's the other important part, is to have them buy in, because they're going to have to explain that to the members. The members, I think, will like it, because no one likes to be closed for a week for aerification. So I think overall it's going to be good. It's not a long-term solution, but temporarily it'll help that club a lot.
So every club's a little different. Like and when you were down in Florida, down there, down in the Florida area, and looks like we're gonna have a few golf clubs down there in Florida. So a little different agronomy practice down there than obviously the Mid Atlantic or up in the Northeast or even in the Carolinas. So each of those are all just a little bit different. You know, different types of grass, different plan. But in the end, you still have some steadfast principles that you're still working with.
Yes, it's still the same as far as the turf is concerned. Obviously, in the longer growing season in the Florida region, different grasses, the aerification schedules can get more intense, because the ability for the greens to go sideways or the fairways to go sideways, just with the longer and continued growing season is such. And different areas, like in Florida, there was a much bigger issue with insects, as opposed to up in this area. There's some insects, but the disease pressure is greater up here. So it's kind of a mindset difference that goes involved depending on the geographical area.
Right. So the last thing that we're going to discuss is looking obviously with we do have some golf courses that are Audubon certified. Some of them think it's a priority. Some owners don't think it's a priority. It really lends itself on the owners or the boards or the clubs of whether or not they want to be certified, Audubon certified. And obviously with that comes, you're putting out chemicals out there on the playing field, and looking at all the fungicides and the chemicals, and are we essentially putting out the right chemicals at the right times, and then what's the cost of those chemicals that are going out there, and is there any other opportunities for us to do it better for less, and then just do it better overall.
Right. So we look at that, and overall in the communities at large, they're getting more and more restrictive. There's some places in Virginia that want to restrict the use of herbicides. Further north, a lot of those states have bans on fertilizers and chemicals and stuff like that. Virginia also has a ban on some fertilizer that's just not being able to use. And Florida does also, for that matter. So you have to look at the whole program, and we also look at when we're putting together a chemical application program and stuff like that. We look at not all chemicals are the same, so we might look at something that has a longer residual. It may be more expensive, but it saves you some labor, and it gives you a longer window of opportunity. And so we'll look at some of those things. Obviously, a lot of superintendents use growth regulators and wetting agents and things like that to help them make it through the summer, to help with mowing, to help keep grass under control, to help water management through the irrigation system, to cut down on maybe some hand labor with hand watering in the summertime, which it's always been a big deal in golf courses. And so we look at all that. We also look at, to get value for the club, we look at buying programs. There's early order programs. There's bulk buying that you can take advantage of. There's some buying clubs that you can be a part of. And we look for all that stuff to really try and get the best value for the club that we're at.
So in summary of kind of all the things that we discussed, obviously the golf course is such a major part of the club, unequivocally, and always needs to be in really good shape, and it's one of the driving factors for the club's success. And while golf maintenance is a purely expense part on the budget. It's actually the way that we look at it as a protection of the asset and protection of the club itself. And there's certain key resources that need to be expensed and spent out there on the golf course so that the golf course continues to move forward. Communicating to the management what's possible in a certain price range, what's possible if we go up 20,000, 30,000, 40, 50,000 in the golf maintenance budget, what is possible, what could happen out there, and vice versa. If you go down 50, 40, 30,000, what are some of the implications of those management decisions that rear their ugly head on the P&L statement? Is there opportunities looking throughout the entire property, generally 260, 250 acres that are out there? Maybe if you're lucky, the superintendent at Merriam that's only managing 70. Is there areas for out of play? Looking at the existing labor. Labor is so hard. It's so hard to get great people onto your bus, and you got to take care of the best people that work and decide to work with you each and every day, and there's a value to someone who's been around the block a time or two.
Tremendous value.
Yeah. So not only do they know the course, they know the nuances, they know what to look for, and there's times in which they're going to give leading indicators on something that's maybe going sideways before the superintendent actually has a chance to look at it. So, and it's another set of eyes that are out there. So that's something that the clubs really need to pay attention to. Keeping the equipment running, making sure that you have the right equipment.
Right equipment, and that everything's running.
Yeah. So that like we always say. Like we say in running itself, you got to keep that ball running, because if you get hurt, you get injured, you got to step aside for a couple of weeks, and then you got to build yourself back up. Same thing, golf maintenance. You got to keep that golf course equipment running, making those long-term effects. Making the long-term decisions. Those are big rocks that you have. As far as the aerifications, you skip too many aerifications, and it's recipe for
you're going back twice as fast.
Exactly. And then really revisiting your chemical plan and saying what's the highest and most valuable use of your chemicals that you're putting down on there. Lots of moving parts in agronomy. It's forever changing. And we recognize that last year, 2018, was the wettest year that we've had since the 1800s here in the Mid-Atlantic. That was nightmares for the superintendents that are there, especially when you see the temperature spike. And every superintendent across in the Mid-Atlantic area sweats bullets from June 15th all the way to September 15th. And it's just the nature of the beast. Different animal down in the Florida sector, Carolinas, a lot different types of grasses, but different challenges. So each property has its own unique challenges, and it's how the teams that are there adjust to those particular challenges and to put out a first-rate product. If you're struggling and you want maybe an independent view of your facility, please don't hesitate to give us a call. We'd love to come and talk to you and your board as well. So this is what we do. In the end, we fix clubs. We make them operator hopefully a little bit better and a little bit more profitable. Thanks. I'm Sean Taylor. This is Jeff Carlstrand. And thank you for watching Build a Great Club series.
Thank you.